Hi folks, welcome back. And I want to begin this video by revisiting the pattern of base pairing that I mentioned at the end of the first video on the structure of DNA, where A always binds with T with 2 hydrogen bonds, and G always binds with C with 3 hydrogen bonds. And as I said, randomness would not match these bases in such a pattern. There would be a random arrangement to the bases on each DNA strand. And without the pattern of base pairing, DNA is no longer reproducible. Its life essential information is gone. Its functions are completely lost, and therefore life is lost. And I want to continue with this, talking about what I ended up with in the last video, the pattern of bond usage in DNA. And specifically, I want to continue discussing the hydrogen bonds used to base pair the DNA, the bases in the middle of DNA. And it does so by binding the bases on the one strand with the bases across from them on the other DNA strand. Because again, how this happens could not be the result of randomness, the hallmark of evolution. You must understand that the nature of the hydrogen bonds used to base pair in the middle of the DNA is completely dependent upon the chemical structure of each nucleotide. And that's the reason why I explained the chemical composition of the nucleotides. And to remind you, take a look at this slide. Here again is our 2D image of a nucleotide. And in this case, it would be the letter A of our 4 bases, since it includes adenine. And I want to point out the critical importance of the chemical composition here. You must have the exact atoms used to create the structures exactly as they are. And you must have the exact atomic structure necessary to be able to create hydrogen bonds in the first place, because most atoms cannot form hydrogen bonds. You must know that a hydrogen bond is the interaction between a hydrogen atom and an electronegative atom of another molecule or chemical group. You must know that an electronegative atom is an atom that has a strong tendency to attract electrons toward itself, such as a nitrogen or an oxygen. Furthermore, you must know that the hydrogen must be covalently bonded to another electronegative atom to create the bond. And you must know all this while you're making the nucleotides, before they get incorporated into DNA, because they're the building blocks of DNA, and they come first. So when they're incorporated into DNA, the correct atoms will line up exactly as necessary to create the hydrogen bonds. And notice how the atoms necessary for making the hydrogen bonds can line up right across from one another. So you need to know where to position the specific atoms that can create hydrogen bonds in the nucleotides. So when they create DNA, the correct ones will line up exactly where they need to be to create hydrogen bonds. Therefore, you have to see and know the structure of DNA ahead of time, before it's even made, while you're still at the stage of creating nucleotides. So once again, we see a pattern in the positioning of the hydrogen bond-forming atoms, in the creation of the nucleotides, and their incorporation into DNA. And yet again, this structure tells us that both intelligence and prescience are an absolute requirement for and during the creation of the structure of DNA. You must know the structure of each nucleotide and which atoms have the capability of forming hydrogen bonds ahead of time. you must know the exact structure of each nucleotide ahead of time, exactly where the hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen atoms must be in the structure of each nucleotide in order to plan to strategically, intentionally, and intelligently use them in the design and the creation of the structure of DNA. Randomness, which is the basis of evolution, does not and could not create such an organized, logical, intelligent, ordered, choreographed, and essential pattern of usage of atoms that have the capability to form hydrogen bonds in the required locations in the structure of DNA. Randomness, by definition, is the opposite of organization, intelligence, logic, order, choreography, and patterns. Randomness does not result from intelligence and prescience because it's random. Randomness is like repeatedly rolling dice or repeatedly selecting a card from a deck of playing cards. You never know what you get. It always varies, and there's no intelligence, logic, organization, or pattern to it. It's like telling a computer programmer to create a program by randomly selecting the figures that he or she uses. Since we know ahead of time that computer language is a binary code, if a programmer just entered figures at their whim, you would never get a functional product. And my son will be happy that I used that analogy again. Randomness would result in atoms being used in DNA in a random fashion. If the randomness of evolution created DNA, there would be a complete disarray of atom usage with no structure, order, organization, logic, choreography, or patterns. Such a disarray of atom usage would prevent the possibility of an organized, ordered, logical, intelligent, choreographed, and essential pattern of hydrogen bond uses in the DNA. This would result in a change in the nature and composition of the structure of DNA and destroy its ability to perform its essential functions. The fallout from all this would be that life would not be possible. Therefore, randomness, which is the basis of evolution, does not have the ability to create such an organized, intelligent, logical, ordered, choreographed, and essential pattern of atom usage in a structure like DNA. And if we look at this image of DNA again, I want to point out something else here. It's not only that the atoms have to line up across from one another to create the hydrogen bonds. The bases have to fit spatially inside the DNA molecule. Once again, you have to see and know the structure of DNA ahead of time, before it's even made, while you're still at the stage of creating nucleotides. You have to know ahead of time that the design of the nucleotides will work to allow the bases to fit inside the DNA after they're incorporated into the molecule. So when you look at the structure of the bases themselves, which I'm showing here on this slide, notice that two of them, the two on the top, A and G, they're called purines, by the way. I'll give you that for free. Have a double ring structure inside their design. While the other two, C and T at the bottom, they're called pyrimidines, by the way. And I'll give you that for free today too. They have only one ring in their structure. Then when we look back at DNA, notice how a double ring structure always binds with a single ring structure. A with T, and G with C. If this was not the case, they would never fit inside the DNA. Once again, we see more patterns. We see a pattern in the base pairing of G with C and A with T, enabling a double ring to pair with a single ring and fit inside the DNA molecule. When each strand of the DNA comes together, there's only so much room in the middle of the structure for the bases to create the rungs. Base structures that are too large would not fit inside the DNA. And furthermore, they would not allow the bases to be brought together in the exact orientation necessary to create the hydrogen bonds. Base structures that are too small would fit inside the DNA, but would still result in the same problem, not allowing the base structures to come close enough together or in the exact position necessary to create the hydrogen bonds that hold the two strands together. Any base structure that does not bring the hydrogen atoms required to create the hydrogen bonds into the necessary position spatially will not allow hydrogen bonding to occur. Again, a helpful analogy here is that of a zipper, where the nucleotides are the teeth in the zipper. If the teeth of a zipper are all varying sizes, the zipper will never be able to open and close because the various size teeth will physically not allow it to do so. Some teeth will be too large, which will prevent the zipper from closing. They'll be too large for the slider to move across them and lock them together, while some teeth will be too small, which will also prevent the zipper from closing. They'll be too small to reach across and grab the tooth on the other side of the zipper. And it's the exact same scenario with DNA. Just as you can look at a zipper and know that it was designed to open and close in the way that it does, with the two halves remaining intact and unchanged, you can look at DNA and see that it was designed to do the exact same thing. As I said, DNA could not perform its essential functions without being able to be opened and closed and remain intact and unchanged. And if that was not possible, life would not be possible. Without the design of the nucleotides and the entire DNA molecule, none of this would be possible. So you must know everything about the final product, the DNA, before you make the building blocks, the nucleotides. Yet again, you have to see and know the structure of DNA ahead of time, before it's even made, while you're still at the stage of creating nucleotides. You have to know ahead of time that the design of the nucleotides will work to allow the bases to fit inside the DNA after they've been incorporated into the molecule. And once again, you do not get such patterns from randomness. This structure tells us that both intelligence and prescience are an absolute requirement for and during the creation of the nucleotides and the final product, the DNA. Randomness, which is the basis of evolution, does not and could not create such an organized, intelligent, logical, ordered, choreographed, and essential pattern in the base pairing of the nucleotides in the structure of DNA. Randomness, by definition, is the opposite of organization, intelligence, logic, order, choreography, and pattern. Randomness does not result from intelligence and prescience because it's random. So let me ask you something. Are you getting tired of hearing me saying this over and over yet? Well, I hope not, because I still have a very long way to go with this. There's so much more that I still have to share with you, that this truly is the case of beating a dead horse. But it's about time somebody is explaining the obvious. I have a friend who would say, "You have an amazing grasp of the obvious." And to that I would have to reply, "Yes, I do. And I want you to have it too." Because the problem is the evolutionists don't. Or maybe they do. And they just don't want to believe that there's a God who created everything exactly like he said he did. I prefer to believe that is the case. I think they're plenty smart enough to see the obvious, that the structure and functions of DNA simply cannot be explained scientifically. They just don't want to. They'd rather stay wrapped up in all their lies and deception. And, not surprisingly, there's a verse that summarizes this very well. It's Isaiah 28:15, which says, "We have made falsehood our refuge, and we have concealed ourselves with deception." And I think that's the perfect place to end this video. But come on back for the next one, where we'll be doing more of stating the obvious. And if you like what you hear, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for watching. And as always, we'll leave the light on for you.